About chapter 3 reading in Leviticus, but I've asked you to take the reading from something that is additional to chapter 3. That's Leviticus chapter 7, verses 11 to 21. Thank you, Mr.
Leviticus chapter 7, starting at verse 11. This is the law of the sacrifice of peace offerings which he shall offer to the Lord. If he offers it for a thanksgiving, then he shall offer with the sacrifice of thanksgiving unleavened cakes mixed with oil, unleavened wafers anointed with oil, or cakes of blended flour mixed with oil. Besides the cakes, as his offering he shall offer leavened bread with the sacrifice of thanksgiving of his peace offering. And from it he shall offer one cake from each offering as a heave offering to the Lord. It shall belong to the priest who sprinkles the blood of the peace offering. The flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering for thanksgiving shall be eaten the same day it is offered. He shall not leave any of it until morning. But if the sacrifice of his offering is a vow or a voluntary offering, it shall be eaten the same day that he offers the sacrifice, but on the next day the remainder of it also may be eaten. The remainder of the flesh of the sacrifice on the third day must be burned with fire. And if any of the flesh of the sacrifice of his peace offering is eaten at all on the third day, it shall not be accepted, nor shall it be imputed to him. It shall be an abomination to him who offers it, and the person who eats of it shall bear guilt. The flesh that touches any unclean thing shall not be eaten. It shall be burned with fire. And as for the clean flesh, all who are clean may eat of it. But the person who eats the flesh of the sacrifice of the peace offering that belongs to the Lord, while he is unclean, that person shall be cut off from his people. Moreover, the person who touches any unclean thing, such as human uncleanness, an unclean animal, or any abominable unclean thing, and who eats the flesh of the sacrifice of the peace offering that belongs to the Lord, that person shall be cut off from his people.
There we are. That reading is easier than the one in Leviticus 3. There we are. We've been doing the peace offering. Been doing the various offerings that are offered in the Old Testament and how they are relevant for us today. Not that we have to repeat these offerings, but they have a relevance for us. And so over the recent weeks, the last 3 weeks, this is the third week now, we've done what they call the voluntary offerings. The burnt offering, the first one that's the one we looked at in chapter 1 of Leviticus, and then last week we looked at the meal offering. That's the offering of the labour of your hands. We ploughed the fields and gathered. That type of mindset is in there. That's in Leviticus chapter 2, and this week we have the final of the voluntary offerings, that which comes of your own free will. There is no obligation to offer these offerings on your behalf. No obligation. It is completely free will. It is down to you. No one can force you. You don't have to do it because someone else is doing it. You do it because you want to do it. And so that's what these three offerings really look at. Next week we look at, and the week after, 2 offerings that are compulsory. And when we see the reason for the compulsory nature of the offering, we'll understand why. So really, this week we're looking at Leviticus chapter 3, and we're looking at the peace offering. Because of the shallow way we look at peace today, for many of us today, peace means free from conflict. But that's not what the meaning of the Jewish word shalom means. And so you have some writers that will call it the well-being offering. The well-being offering. And it talks about the whole person. That's what this peace, shalom, means. It's not just talking about the periphery. It's talking about the whole being of the person. And so whether they're in conflict or not, they're at peace. It doesn't necessarily mean you remove conflict. It means you have peace. And so I think it was on Tuesday night, Carol Cooper prayed before she went away on holidays. And she quoted a verse that says about whose leaf shall not wither, and it being fruit out of season then. And so this is what shalom means. It is fruit out of season. When you're not supposed to have peace, you can have peace. When you're not supposed to be happy, you can be happy. When you're not supposed to be warm and loving, you can really care. And so this is what the nature of God offers us. It is not subject to circumstance. It's very, very important. It is not subject to circumstance. If we are just subject to circumstance, then we have no difference in our lives at all to what is outside in what we would call the world. The Christian has fruit in and out of season. And so we look at this. So it's sometimes called the well-being offering. And because of what goes on in the giving of the peace offering, the NIV, the New International Version, quite rightly so in one respect, calls it the fellowship offering. Because of what goes on in the peace offering. Because this peace, this shared experience that you have with God, is to be shared with others also. And so they call it the fellowship. Some even call it the communion offering, liken it to the New Testament, because it is set around a table, which is quite fascinating. The informality of this offering really stands out as you just ponder what went on. We very much think of the Old Testament as something that is very regulated, and in one sense it is. But there was an informality in the service, in the giving of the peace offering. And so we'll just have a look at something. But this is one of the first things that I want to look. Just step outside of Leviticus. This is what the Lord says in the book of Deuteronomy. No need to turn to it. I'm just going to read one or two verses from Deuteronomy chapter 6. And then we're going to look at some verses there where the Lord's talking about a place that he is going to have, that he might dwell, and wants to go on there. You shall seek the place where the Lord your God chooses out of all your tribes to put his name for his dwelling place, and there you shall go. There you shall take your burnt offerings, your sacrifices, your tithes, your heave offerings of your hand, your vowed offerings, your freewill offerings, and the firstborn of your herds. There you shall eat before the Lord your God, and you shall rejoice in all which you put your hand, you and your household, in which the Lord your God has blessed you. This is one of these experiences, or one of these, well, I suppose in one sense, an old rabbi was asked, what is the hardest commandment to keep? And everyone is expecting him to say, to love the Lord your God with all your heart, or to love your neighbour as yourself. But he said the hardest commandment is found in the Feast of Tabernacles, where we are commanded to rejoice for 7 days. To be happy for 7 days. There's a few faces that are clicking it now, clocking it, see where it's coming from. But in this, the sense of being together is filled with joy in this gathering that goes on in this peace offering. It's important to remember that it is a celebration, and it is God who is the host, and the worshippers are guests. And in the Old Testament, he talks of a table that he and they may feast at. The familiarity that is bred in this particular offering really puts aside the formality that we so often attach to religious services. There is a tremendous sense of openness of heart when you come to the peace offering. Let's just have a little look at some of the things in Leviticus chapter 3, verse 1. When his offering is a sacrifice of peace offering, if he offers it of the herd, whether male or female, he shall offer it without blemish before the Lord. Two things stand out. Again, we have to reiterate it. It is not a case of if you bring, it is a case of when you bring. And so the mindset behind God's command or God's exhortation is this: surely you will come. It's not a case of if, it's a case of when. And so they say that about the San Andreas fault, don't they? It's not a case of if, but when it's going to go. That fault line that goes down through the west of America, down through California. It's not a case of if, it's a case of when. And so here, not that this is an earthquake experience, I don't mean that, but it's a case of if and when. Oh, sorry, not if, but when. Surely you would want to offer a peace offering. Surely you would. Surely you would want to offer a burnt offering. Surely you would want to offer a meal offering. And the other thing that goes with it is this, that it was to be without blemish. It was not to be something that was to be second best. It was to be the best. There are a number of stipulations. It could come from the herd, that is, oxen or bulls or cows, whatever you want to call it. It could come from the flock, from sheep or goats. But it could not be like the burnt offering from birds. And it's not until you begin to understand the reasoning behind that, or you understand what goes on within the peace offering, you understand that there's just not a pigeon big enough to feed. As simple as that. Just not a pigeon or a turtle not big enough. The most you could offer was 2 pigeons, 2 turtle doves, and what this offering was for, that was to be shared, then they would not be big enough. And so its stipulation is for the herd or for the flock. Some of the other things that goes on with it, verses 3 to 4, it talks of the delicacies that God is interested in. And the richest portions then belong solely to God. And so there are a number of things that he mentioned here, which to us in our Western mind sound very, I can imagine if you're vegetarian, then you won't be enjoying this part. But it talks about all the fat around the internal organs, the major organs, all the fat around those, and the 2 kidneys, and the lobe of the liver. That's all God was interested in. That's all he was interested in. The best was offered in the sense that it was without blemish. But it went further than that. Essentially, the most inner parts were offered. The very inner being was being offered here. You will sometimes find that word, especially in the Authorized Version, in the Old King James, in the Psalms. Our reins. The Lord tries our reins. Do you know what it literally means? He tries our kidneys. It can be translated to mean that. It's talking about the whole inner person. The richest portion, the richest fat, and the richest organs. And so we have with this offering that is without blemish, it's the most inner, richest parts, the strongest emotions that are being offered. The greatest strengths being presented. And they were solely for the Lord. Verse 5 tells us that it was offered upon the burnt offering. It was never offered alone. Never. You will not find, even though an animal is sacrificed, even though blood is shed and hands are laid upon the sacrificial animal as if to denote a transference of sin that we find so very often in the Old Testament, there is no mention of atonement here. It's never once mentioned in either this chapter or in chapter 7. It is laid, as in verse 5, upon the burnt offering. And that's where the atonement comes. This is not an atoning worker. It is laid solely on the burnt offering that is being placed upon the altar. And it's just those parts that we've just mentioned now that would be laid on that altar. With it in chapter 7, as Neil went through some of the finer details of the offering, we find some of the elements of what we spoke about last week, didn't we? The meal offering there. It talked about cakes being made with fine flour and anointed or mixed with oil. Strangely, it talks about leavened cakes. Interesting to note, though, never are those leavened cakes placed on the altar. They are given to the priest to wave before the Lord. They're not put on the altar. Remember it said last week? No leaven shall come on my altar. No corruption shall come on that. Leaven is a beautiful example of pride, in that when you place leaven or yeast within the flour there, it immediately, or after a period of time, rises up. It's bigger than it ought to be. And so he said, you don't put leaven on there. But these leaven cakes are there for us. The burnt offering tells us about all that we are. The best and all committed to the will of God. The meal offering says, all the work of our hands belong to you. The peace offering says, everything within me is yours. This moves, it doesn't allow this Christian or Old Testament faith to remain merely outward for people to look at. It is essentially inward. And once it is inward, then it comes out and shows itself. This is what the chorus says. You'll be familiar with it. All that I am, I lay before you. All I possess is nothing without you. Saviour and King, I now enthrone you. Take my life, my living sacrifice to you. There's the burnt offering, look, all that I am. There's the meal offering, all I possess. There's the peace offering, Lord, I enthrone you. It's the whole inner being here that's being reached and being presented to God. Are we interested only in a show of religion? Is the Lord pleased with just a show of religion? And all the paraphernalia that goes with religion itself? No, he's not interested in that. He's interested in the innermost being. As he said to Ezekiel concerning his temple, this is my throne. This is the place of the soles of my feet. What a lovely way to talk about God's house. What does Jesus say concerning us? Is it not along the same line that we are to be a people who from our innermost being have given ourselves to him? Have a look at some other things on it. There's too much detail for us to go through in all the different things and aspects that are going on there. But it's the last, as I mentioned, of the 3 voluntary offerings. And there are 3 reasons as to why you would want to offer a peace offering to the Lord. The first one in chapter 7, verse 15 says this, it is there presented for thanksgiving. It's a lovely little word, this term, thanksgiving. I will enter his gates with thanksgiving in my heart. I will enter his courts. That's the peace offering. That's the peace offering. It means confession. It means testimony. It also means choir. They have singing there. It takes away the formality of what we think the Old Testament would like. It takes it away completely. And so this peace offering would be that. Those parts that are solely God's are placed upon the altar, and then the remainder of the offering is returned back to the offerer, and that would be shared with the serving priest and with the priests, the sons of Aaron. And it would also be shared with his family and members of the household and of the community. And so here, for thanksgiving, for nothing else but just to give thanks for God. You remember Maureen Brock, before this ill health took her. Remember one Saturday night when she gave a testimony many, many years ago. I think when Roger was opening up some Saturday night meetings. And this is what she said. This has been a good year for me. And when you think of all the difficulties that they'd gone through, she not knowing the difficult years that she was going to go through, what was she doing? I just want to thank you, Lord. You see, it's a confession. It's a testimony. But but there would also be singing. But she sang that night, each step I take. Each step I take. It could be thanksgiving, it could be confession, it could be singing. This would all be built into this word rejoice. It would show itself in so many ways. Someone would just pipe up, "Oh, Martin, tell us about the way God delivered you. Tell us about that testimony." Someone said to me the other day, "Have you asked someone so they got a lovely testimony, you know?" And so they would make confession. This is what God has done for me. The next one it says in verse, that was in verse 12, chapter 7. Verse 15, a vow. That is a considered promise. You weren't allowed to make rash vows. If you did, you had to stand by them. You had to stand by them. If you made a rash vow, you had to stand by them. Wasn't it Jephthah made that rash vow? Whoever I see as I enter onto my property, whoever's first will be offered unto the Lord. And it was his daughter. See, a rash vow. A rash vow. I don't believe that he put her on the sacrifice. I don't believe that. But she was given solely to God then, like Samuel, like Joseph. She was given, that's why she wept, for she would never have children. And so we find here the vow, the promised, or the considered promise. And then verse 15 will talk about this then, the free will offering. The opposite of a vow. Spontaneous response. Spontaneous response. With no strings attached. With no strings attached. It's a lovely one, this. And so you have these three different ways of approaching this peace offering. You would want to give thanks. You would want to bear testimony for what God has done for you. Or for your family. And you would offer the peace offering. And then portions of it, large portions, would be sent back to you once the animal or the parts had been laid upon the altar. It could be a vow. A promised, considered vow before the Lord. Hannah did it, didn't she? She said to her son, "If you give me a son, he'll be yours, Lord. He'll be yours." That wasn't a rash one. That's something that she had considered, pondered upon, counted the cost of it. And so she vowed before the Lord. It says concerning this free will offering, utterly spontaneous. What a marvelous way when Moses said, "Now we've got to do a collection for the tabernacle. We need materials, we need gold, we need silver." And a report came back after the offerings came in. You've got to tell the people to stop. They're giving too much. See, a free will offering. If you don't want to give, fine. No problem at all, he would have said. But if you want to give. Do you know the giving is so much, Moses, we've got to tell them to stop. Did that in some of the Romanian churches, didn't they, in former days? When they were trying to build churches and knock down their internal walls of their homes, that the bricks could be used for the church. What type of free will offering is this? When your whole inner being responds back with love and devotion and a care within your heart that you want to give thanks to God. It's a wonderful, wonderful thing. There were some rules regarding it. If you notice, it was either a bull or a cow, or a sheep or a goat. You could not keep this offering to yourself. If it was a Thanksgiving offering, it had to be eaten on that day. Now, I cooked a joint of beef on Friday. Right? We were still eating it yesterday, well into it. Joint of beef, it was like that. Just over 1 kilogram. We were still eating it. It normally has. It's still some there now, so probably tonight. When Judith is not looking, I'll make a sandwich, and when she's not looking, I'll put salt on it. Is there anything better than beef and tomato with salt on? But don't tell her that, please. For the Thanksgiving offering, it had to be eaten that day. How are you going to eat a bull in a day? How are you going to do that? It's enforced that which was within to come out. It enforced it. How could you eat a goat all by yourself? Can't do it. Like a lamb. You get a big leg of lamb sometimes from Morrison's. The whoppers, don't you? Those bargain ones that come out sometimes. And it's amazing how far it can go. For the vow and free will offering, for some reason it could be at the next day. You could eat. In effect, it was this: no doggy bags. No doggy bags. No, you don't do that. This has to be shared. You couldn't keep it to yourself. Your family, your servants, your households and community, with the priests. It had to be shared, enforcing friendships. Strengthening bonds. And ultimately to invite those that you would not normally invite. There was a stipulation that anyone that took part in this meal that was before the Lord, they had to be clean. So it could not all and sundry could do it. But remember, God is speaking here to a people that, as far as he was concerned, is redeemed. They are his people. And he wants them all to share in fellowship. And so it makes the offerer push the boundaries. It makes them push the boundaries. It makes them extend the borders. It will not allow them to shrink. It won't allow them to do that. It will always push the boundaries on it. And so there might be a priest that's the serving priest that you're not too fussed on. A portion goes to him. Whether you like it or not, a portion goes to him. The sons of Aaron, that little clique that seems to have everything, a portion goes to them. And then to the members of the community and to the household, portions go to them, and you would all sit together. He brought me into his banqueting house, and his banner over me is love. This is what the New Testament says about this offering. We say it is included. Listen to the words that the writer to the Hebrews tell us. Hebrews 13, verse 16. By him let us offer continually the sacrifice of our praise to God, the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to his name. But do not forget to do good and to share, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased. God is well pleased. Read it again. Listen to it now. Here's this peace offering book. By him let us offer continually the sacrifice of our praise to God, the fruit of our lips, giving thanks to his name. Do not forget to do good and to share, for with such sacrifices God is well pleased. That's the peace offering in New Testament terms. It's relevant to us. It's relevant to us. It makes us extend the borders, to push out, to reach out. There are some other things that we find with it as we look for examples in the Old Testament. Exodus 24, I read from it on Tuesday night just as an example. This is what happens in Exodus 24, verse 5. It says this: and Moses took the blood and sprinkled it on the people. Wait a minute, I've gone a bit earlier. Verse 5, sorry, that's verse 8. Then Moses sent young men of the children of Israel who offered burnt offerings and sacrificed peace offerings of oxen to the Lord. Verse 9, this is what then reads. Then Moses went up, also Aaron and his sons Nadab and Abihu, and 70 of the elders of Israel, and they saw the God of Israel. And there was under his feet, as it were, a paved work of sapphire stone. It was like the very heavens in its clarity. In other words, It was as if heaven had come down. But on the nobles of the children of Israel, he did not lay his hand. And so they saw God, and they did eat and drink. They saw God, and they did eat and drink. When it says he did not lay his hand upon the nobles, when Moses asked to see God, and show me your glory, Lord, he said, well, I'll show you my glory, but this is what I do. I'm going to put you in the cleft of the rock, and I'll cover you with my hand, so that you cannot see me. And Moses says, I saw his back parts. I saw his shoulders. Sure, he did not place his hand upon the nobles, that they saw his feet, we are told. Under his feet. Didn't see him, but they saw his feet. A paved work of sapphire. When Ezekiel saw God on his throne, he said it was a throne of sapphire. And here, from heaven above, coming down to Mount Sinai, was a pavement of sapphire stone that God was walking upon. He'd come down amongst them to enjoy a feast with them. They saw God and did eat and drink. Our good friend John Wesley said this of the communion table, that it was the most productive of all his services in people finding Christ. How we turn it around, don't we? For him, you think of all the success that he had, the tens of thousands that he preached on singular occasions, when he would preach and thousands would get saved. But he says, the value of the communion table, he said, as far as he was concerned, was the most productive for people to see Christ. Now, what of this table here today? Are you going to share? Or are you going to keep it to yourself? Are you going to see him? Know him? Knowing you, Jesus. There is no greater thing. Everything within me, the writer says there, wants to know about you. That's this communion table, you know. Do you know you can know him this morning? Put aside all the detail that I've gone through. This is what God is looking for, you. Your innermost being, your kidneys, your rings, that which is closest to your heart. That's what he wants. You've given your all in the burnt offering. You've committed yourself to his will. You've given the work of your hands, commitment to the work of God. But he said, you know, it's just something else I want. I want you. That's what I want. I want a place where I can live. I want a place. But I've said it, and I'll say it again with the tabernacle. The first thing Moses instructed to make, he says, and the people shall make me an ark. He's talking about the inner sanctum of the Holy of Holies. And there, God said, that's what I'm going to be, you see. That's what I'm going to be. That's what I want you. Because that's what I want to be. I want to be. And I want it to be shared. With thanksgiving, with confession, with singing, with vows, considered promises, and with free will, spontaneous responses to his love. That wonderful thing. Why did Matthew have a feast on the day of his conversion? Is that a commoner's view of the peace offering? He invited all his friends, publicans and sinners, to a feast, and he invited Jesus there. Why did Elisha sacrifice all his oxen when he was told to follow Elijah? Why was that? Was he just being, oh, that's going to use them? He shared it with the whole community. Shared it with it all. And so we find here with this. I know there's detail there. I know it's difficult to get through it. The bits and pieces that we're talking about here. But really, it's all about this, receiving him and then sharing him. In all the different ways that he's given us talents to use for that. That's the peace offering. It's a fascinating offering that I trust will draw out your souls to him and to the people around you. Whether they be people of God or people that don't know him as yet. Maybe we're called to share in such circumstances. That's what the peace offering seems to infer. Would you agree? Would you agree? May we extend our borders. Extend our boundaries. George Jerkas Joyce, no boundaries with God. Remember? World Christian Ministries. No boundaries with God. May God grant it that we have no boundaries.